Russia squeezes Ukraine's gas supply and Europe starts to feel the pinch. But the government insists there's no immediate threat to the UK's gas supply. Human bird flu alert in Turkey. A child with symptoms dies in hospital. And Pakistan's earthquake homeless. Dire warnings as winter tightens its grip. Hello, good evening. The government tonight insisted there's no immediate threat to the UK's gas supplies after Russia switched off a quarter of the gas flowing into Ukraine in a bitter row over prices. A fifth of Western Europe's gas flows through Ukraine, and there's concern tonight that energy supplies could be disrupted. Hungary, Austria and Poland have already reported a reduction in their gas deliveries. From Moscow, Damian Grammaticus reports.
In the depths of Europe's winter, a new type of Cold War. Russia today shutting off gas supplies to Ukraine, threatening a long, freezing dispute. Until now, Ukraine has enjoyed cheap gas from Russia, but Moscow is demanding a 400% price rise. The clock ticked down to Moscow's deadline. Until Ukraine agrees to Russia's price, the gas taps will stay shut. Russia's state-controlled gas company predicted catastrophic consequences for Ukraine's economy. This gas dispute could have far-reaching effects. A network of pipelines feeds Russian gas to Ukraine and Europe. Most is destined for European customers. Russia has now cut off Ukraine's share, but Ukraine is warning the drop in pipeline pressure could threaten supplies to Europe. This is the headquarters of Russia's state gas firm. As global energy demand has risen, Russia has gained new clout as an energy supplier. Newfound power it appears determined to exercise.
This dispute is likely to provoke alarm in the West. This year, President Putin is chairing the G8 group of leading industrialized nations. Many may question whether a country that cuts off the gas to its neighbor is fit to head such a group. And some in Europe may ask whether their countries are wise to rely on Russia for future energy supplies.
In Ukraine, industries could soon be affected. The country has reserves of gas. They should last for several weeks at least. The government is insisting Ukrainians can survive the winter without Russian supplies. It's promising they won't be left in the cold. But for Masha Bulgakov and her family, that's little reassurance. They fear the coming days.
I'm very scared and I'm very concerned because our houses are gas-fired, our cookers where we cook are gas-fired, and I have a little son. I should cook for him, I should cook for my family.
Many Ukrainians accuse Russia's president of using energy supplies as a weapon, punishing Ukraine because it's seeking closer ties with Europe. So there is now an icy standoff, and European nations are watching anxiously tonight for any shortfalls in the gas they are receiving. Damian Grammaticus, BBC News, Moscow.
Earlier I spoke to Damian and asked him if Russia had guaranteed that gas supplies to Europe would not be affected by this dispute.
What they are saying, Peter, is that they are pumping the right amount of gas that European customers are demanding. And by implication, Russia is saying that if that gas doesn't reach Europe, then it is Ukraine that is stealing it on the way through. Ukraine, though, is saying already that it doesn't believe Russia is pumping enough to meet European needs. And the drop in pipeline pressure means gas passing through will not be sufficient for European customers.
Russia, of course, is taking over the presidency of the G8. Why has it picked a fight that can only worry the world's other rich nations and blight its presidency?
It's a very good question, a very difficult one to answer because the timing does seem to be very detrimental for Russia's chairmanship of the G8. It will raise questions in the West about Russia's security as an energy provider. Perhaps, though, the question more, if you look at Ukraine, Ukraine has crucial elections coming up in 3 months' time. They will pit President Yushchenko against the man who he beat for the presidency, the Russian-backed candidate Viktor Yanukovych. And many here see this as a way of Russia trying in a way perhaps to undermine the Ukrainian president, boost support for his rival, and that this could be as much about Ukrainian domestic politics as it is about international gas supplies.
Damian Grammaticus, thank you. Britain still produces most of its own gas from the North Sea, and the Energy Minister Malcolm Wicks has said this dispute poses no immediate threat. But in the years ahead, Britain will need to increase the amount of imported gas, so the future is less certain. Here's our business correspondent, Patrick Bartlett.
Household gas users have been hit hard by rising prices. Recently, the increases have been blamed on the soaring cost of imported gas. Once we were self-sufficient, but with North Sea reserves in decline for the past 18 months, we've had to start importing gas to meet our needs. Even so, the UK is still better placed for gas supplies than most of our European partners. Britain produces 90% of the gas we consume. Most of the 10% we import comes from Norway. But compare that with Germany. It buys 38% of its gas from Russia. However, as our reserves decline, we'll need to buy more gas from abroad too, like this liquefied natural gas brought in by tanker from Algeria. The countries selling to us won't all be stable democracies.
At present, much of the gas is imported from Norway, but in time, much more dependence will be placed on gas from Russia. And if there are supply problems, and particularly concerns about supply problems, that's going to increase the risk profile even more.
And that's why Norway is still seen as our best bet. It's developing new gas fields and expects to sell much of its production to the UK. A new undersea pipeline's being built to bring supplies direct to Britain. But Norwegian gas won't be enough on its own. We've got used to taking North Sea gas for granted. We've come to depend on it not just for cooking and heating, but also for our electricity generation. In future, we're going to have to look for our gas supplies further afield, and they may not always be so reliable. Patrick Bartlett, BBC News.
A Turkish boy has died in hospital as doctors wait to find out if he and 3 siblings had contracted bird flu. The 4 children helped on a poultry farm and reportedly became sick after eating a chicken. If confirmed, it would be the first human fatality from bird flu outside Asia. Here's our medical correspondent, Fergus Walsh.
This 5-year-old boy is one of 6 people in eastern Turkey with suspected bird flu. I made him eat chicken, but the chicken was sick, says his mother, and after he ate it, he became like this. All those admitted to hospital developed fevers, coughing and bleeding in their throats, all possible symptoms of bird flu. But they could also be due to other infections. Lab tests are being done to isolate the cause of the illnesses. To date, all the human cases of bird flu have been in the Far East. 141 people have been diagnosed since 2003. Of those, 73 have died, a 50% death rate. If the case in Turkey is confirmed, it means the disease has travelled thousands of miles. In October, it was confirmed that the H5N1 avian flu virus had spread to poultry in Turkey. Thousands of birds were destroyed, and now a fresh cull of poultry in the area has been ordered.
And Fergus Walsh is here now. Fergus, nothing has yet been confirmed from Turkey, but what would be the most worrying scenario?
It would be that this is confirmed. Now, we don't know whether it will be or not. It could have been pneumonia. Let's hope it was. But if it is confirmed, it would be the first case outside the Far East, and it would ratchet up the threat from bird flu quite considerably.
Every time we get one of these cases, the word pandemic gets bandied around, an extensive epidemic. Is that sort of talk realistic or alarming?
It is alarming, but it's also realistic. At some point, this is going to happen. We are going to get a new flu pandemic. The one in 1918 killed 50 million people, and it has the potential to dwarf all other infectious diseases from pneumonia, TB, HIV/AIDS. We're not there yet, even if this case is confirmed. But what it means is the more this disease spreads in poultry, the more likely it is at some point it will then mix in a human or in an animal and become a human infectious disease, and then we would have a global flu pandemic. But we're not there yet, even if this case is confirmed. But it is worrying.
Fergus Walsh, thank you. The heaviest snow of the winter has arrived in the earthquake-hit region of Pakistan, bringing fears that more lives will be lost from exposure to the freezing cold. Nearly 3 months after the disaster, more than 3 million people are still living in temporary shelters. Daniel Bircher reports.
This is what it takes to survive in the mountains around Muzaffarabad. Sweeping snow off tents that are their only shelter, families learn to deal with conditions that are getting harsher by the day. A senior UN official in the region says the relief operation is keeping pace, but only just. Snow has cut off some supply routes, and in weather like this, even helicopters can't help. Staying warm is a daily challenge, the weak more susceptible to disease, and aid agencies are now increasingly worried for the very old and the very young.
It's very upsetting to see these pictures. People have talked about the onset of winter for many months since this earthquake happened, and now we're seeing the reality of what we've warned about for the last few months.
The United Nations estimates that up to 400,000 people are living in higher areas, 2.5 million in tents at lower altitudes, and the task of providing blankets, clothes and food is still enormous, as is medical care. This American military unit is looking after 200 people a day. A US Congress delegation has been assessing progress.
We're here to do everything we can to make sure that the rest of the world realizes that this great catastrophe that happened just a few months ago is still here, and we still need to continue our efforts, and we need to actually increase our efforts to make sure we can continue to make a difference.
And with so much depending on the weather, that is likely to become even more urgent in the coming months. Daniel Bircher, BBC News.
Police in Northumbria have issued a description of a man suspected of abducting a 6-year-old girl from her home while she was having a bath. She's told detectives that he was short and wore a black hat, coat and gloves. The girl, who was taken last Tuesday, was found naked on a street in Willington Quay in North Tyneside. From today, patients in England who are referred for treatment by their GP will be offered a choice of at least 4 hospitals. Ministers hope it will improve standards, but unions fear that unpopular hospitals will close. The Conservative leader David Cameron has called on his party to shake off its right-wing image. He's set out plans to move the Tories towards the centre ground of politics and promised policies which will